The year was 1918. World War I had been raging for 4 years. John T. Thompson was hard at work getting ready to unveil his new design for a weapon that would greatly impact the war: the Thompson submachine gun, one of the most powerful fully automatic weapons of its time. It was born in an era where rows of infantry charged towards enemy trenches, enduring endless volleys of artillery blasts, rifle fire, and immobile machine gun fire. The bolt-action rifles that soldiers wielded were cumbersome in close quarters and at most fired a measly 50 rounds per minute. Thompson's new weapon was versatile, capable of delivering 700 rounds per minute.
Unfortunately for Thompson, World War I came to an end before his weapon could be shipped to American soldiers to prove its power. But this didn't stop the weapon from seeing use. Criminals in the eastern seaboard and Midwest quickly adopted it during the Prohibition era, creating a spike in violence and public outcry. Its use in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and previous crimes prompted police departments nationwide to adopt the gun for their own use. Hollywood films glorified the gun as a symbol of violence. The gun's fearful reputation through crime and film culminated in the government's first attempt to take a stand against gun violence with the National Firearms Act of 1934, Thompson's submachine gun.
The weapon that changed it all.
After World War I, John T. Thompson unsuccessfully attempted to market his gun towards the New York Police Department through public demonstrations. Although the NYPD were impressed by its portability and fast rate of fire, only 10 Tommy guns were purchased by them. Business was slow until Edward E. Richardson, the deputy marshal of Maumee County, Ohio, attended their sales meeting. He was so impressed by the gun that he offered his services as an agent to sell the gun to law enforcement agencies. And soon, it was adopted by the U.S. Postal Service, the U.S. Marines, and county police deputies all over the U.S.
The success of the Tommy gun coincided with the Prohibition era, which is when the newly enacted 18th Amendment permanently banned the sale, transportation, importing, and exporting of alcoholic beverages. Although the ban was meant to deter crime and legislate morality, the opposite occurred. Alcohol was illegally manufactured and bootlegged by organized gangs who resorted to extortion and murder. Certainly, criminals in Boston, New York, and Chicago desired the Thompson. By using fictitious names to buy mass quantities of the weapon, it is estimated that 6,000 of the 15,000 manufactured Tommy guns were in the hands of criminals. The problem began to get out of hand in April 1926. A gangster of the Chicago O'Donnell mob sprayed a barrage of bullets at the state attorney William H. McSwiggan with a Thompson, killing him instantly.
The public was outraged by the level of violence that a single weapon could cause, but this was only the beginning. In late 1926, the body of Chicago mob boss Jaime Weiss was found riddled with bullets from the Thompson. In the winter of 1929, the Chicago Police Department arrived to the scene of 7 dead men from the Moran gang who had been sprayed with 70 rounds from the Thompson. Orchestrated by the notorious Al Capone, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre made national headlines and shocked the nation. By the early 1930s, the public associated the now iconic Thompson with the likes of John Dillinger and George Barnes Jr., who had established his persona as Machine Gun Kelly. The FBI cautioned the public that he was an expert machine gunner, despite the fact that he was never keen on firearms. It was clear that in the Roaring '20s, the public imagination wholly associated the Thompson with the violent gang warfare that plagued American cities. With each crime committed, public outcries for legislation barring the sale of the machine gun to civilians grew.
Along with the infamous crimes, the media from Hollywood exacerbated the public's perception of the Thompson with gangster films such as Scarface, Machine Gun Kelly, and Little Caesar. The classic American gangster was glamorized in these films, and as a result, so was the Thompson. It was both socially reviled and glorified symbolically for the producer of raw carnage and death. This was because the Thompson was the first gun capable of such violence. Through the lens of the director and the viewer, no skill was required to aim a weapon which was capable of delivering 700 rounds per minute. The trigger only needed to be squeezed, and unquestionably, violence would ensue.
The gangster film that most prominently displayed the Thompson was Scarface, released in 1932. Despite the violence, the film incorporated underlying social commentary that greatly influenced the audience's political opinion of the gun. The lawbreakers in the film were able to legally buy the Thompson with the money they've earned from bootlegging, while the police couldn't afford them and had to fight crime with out-of-date weapons.
No law against bringing guns into the state, and we can buy all we want.
The commentary presented by the man in the scene echoed the opinions that many civilians had. Clearly, federal legislation had to be passed.
The Thompson's portrayal in crime in film culminated in the passing of the National Firearms Act of 1934, which imposed the $200 excise tax on persons and entities engaged in the business of importing, manufacturing, and dealing in the Thompson, among other firearms. Adjusted for inflation, $200 is equivalent to $3,582 in 2016. It also required the Thompson to be registered by the Secretary of the Treasury. These hefty costs severely curtailed the distribution of the Thompson submachine gun to people. Proposed by Franklin D. Roosevelt, it was the government's first attempt at gun control. The National Firearms Act of 1938 added to the National Firearms Act of 1934 by putting sale limitations on firearms, which required sellers to keep records of the purchaser and did not allow them to sell to convicted felons. Amended once in 1968 and once more in 1986, the law is still active today, proving its long-term success.
When the U.S.'s involvement in World War II became imminent, the U.S. government placed the largest order on Tommy guns, ordering tens of thousands of firearms. Soon, countries allied with the U.S. like Britain and France also ordered Tommy guns for use in the Western Front. One of the first wartime attacks that the Thompson saw action in was in the hands of British commandos during Operation Claymore. A British commando later commented on the Thompson's power, stating,
"A burst would lift a man off of his feet. No one hit by those bullets ever put up further resistance."
The weapon was so well received that when the British government attempted to replace them with Sten guns, many commandos did not accept them, stating,
"We went mob hand to the commanding officer and said that if we couldn't keep the Tommy guns, we'd all transfer back to our army units. He was sympathetic, and I don't know how they swung it, but the Stens were never issued to us."
Undoubtedly, the Thompson gave many new capabilities to soldiers that were not possible before it. Sergeant Leonard A. Funk, a U.S. paratrooper, received the Medal of Honor after a Nazi officer pointed a pistol at Funk and ordered him to surrender. Saying that he was faced with at least 80 Nazi war prisoners, Funk pretended to concede. Suddenly, he whipped out his Thompson and mowed down the Nazis, killing 22 and injuring 24. The Thompson's versatility and fast rate of fire enabled Funk to defeat the enemy and save his own men in the process. The Thompson was undeniably one of the most dangerous Allied weapons of World War II. Although the National Firearms Act had been passed almost a decade before, its effectiveness in the Second World War was the final confirmation to lawmakers and citizens alike that the gun did not belong in the hands of civilians.
The Thompson submachine gun became iconic through its lethality in organized crime, glamorization in popular culture, and deadly impact in World War II. It sparked political debates over whether or not such a deadly firearm should be possessed by civilians, culminating in the passing of the National Firearms Act of 1934. What's more, however, is that it gave rise to new discussions about firearms that still continue today. Civilians began to take a stand by questioning which weapon should be protected by the Second Amendment. Where do we draw the line between which weapons civilians are entitled to possess?